Hello guys, Scott Laidler here. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new. In this video I'd like to talk to you about recomposition. So this is losing body fat and gaining muscle mass at the same time. So these are the kind of transformations that you'll see where somebody gets really muscular and really shredded at the same time, and you'll see this in magazines, you'll see this in internet videos, and maybe even on billboards from time to time. And I want to talk to you about whether it's a feasible option, whether it's scientifically possible, and it is, but it might not be a feasible option for you. It depends where you are on your training journey. To give you a little bit of context of my training journey, I started training when I was about 18, 34 now. Back then we really didn't have a word recomposition. It really wasn't a thing. The only people that could lose body fat and gain muscle mass at the same time were people that were on steroids or people that were just starting out. So if you were completely new, you could get those kind of newbie gains, and you would lose body fat and gain muscle at the same time. But I wouldn't recommend that as a beginner game. I'll tell you why in a second. I wouldn't recommend that as a goal starting out of the blocks. So to kind of recount my experience, back then it was the conventional bodybuilding narrative, which was you do these long bulking cycles and you do these long cutting cycles, which is great. I mean, don't get me wrong, they work. It's a great way to put on muscle mass and it's a great way to get lean. But when you're starting out, you don't necessarily get it all right. I certainly didn't. So when I bulked up, I took on too many calories. I was doing the 4 and 5 day splits, and I did gain size, but I gained way too much body fat along with that. So I never really felt like I was in shape. I never really felt like a lean person, despite putting quite a lot of hard work and effort into the training. So once I was comfortable with the amount of size I gained, despite never really feeling in shape or kind of body confident, I decided I'm gonna do a cutting phase. So what I'll do is I'll get really lean, and then all this muscularity that I've gained is going to be on show, and I'll feel really great. I'll be a lean individual. But it didn't really work out that way. I was overzealous with it, and I took my calories down too low, took my carbohydrates down too low, was really depleted, didn't have great workouts, trained twice a day to try to overdo it, and what ended up happening was that I would kind of work off a lot of the muscle mass that I had gained. So when I was doing bulking phases, I was doing them for too long, gaining too much body fat along with the muscle size, and then when I was doing the cutting phases, I was losing a lot of that muscle. So maybe it would cross over for a few weeks where I would feel good, but really it was and this went on for a few years. It was just never really the kind of training that was satisfying me, because I was entering the health and fitness industry at the time, and I wanted to be lean year round, but I also wanted to gain muscle size. So, and I mean, this is, if you think about the scale, this is over a course of like maybe 5 to 10 years. Science had come on a long way, a lot of bodybuilders had come on a long way, a lot of health coaches had come on a long way. So recomposition was back on the table, and it wasn't just for people who were on steroids. Now, if you put the prior planning in and you put the dedication in with the right training and approach to nutrition and lifestyle measures, recomposition was actually possible. So this is the goal I set for myself, and I achieved it. I set the goal of, okay, I'm not just doing this for a photo shoot or something like that. I want to prove to myself that for a year I could be 10% body fat. So I put the recomposition training in place, trained that way for a year, and I gradually gained muscle mass and got leaner, and I hang around that 10%, but I don't call it maintenance. It's not maintenance, because I am getting more muscular slowly and getting leaner at the same time. And over the course of a year, with intermittent other phases, so I wouldn't do the same training for a year. I would pull back, do a little bit of volume training, do a bit of 5x5 training, have obviously rest periods, but the main focus of the year was recomposition, and I was able to hang around that 10% mark year round. So let me show you how I did it. So there are 4 core principles of successful recomposition training. These are calorie cycling, progressive overload, intermittent fasting, and lifestyle. So the first one, calorie cycling, we need to reframe how we think about calorie cycling. So we're going to switch from thinking on a daily basis to a weekly basis. Over the course of the week, we want to maintain a slight calorie deficit so that fat loss is possible. But over the course of the week, we can have training days where we have a break even or slight surplus, which means that we can maintain positive protein synthesis and muscle gain is possible over the course of time, like we're trying to achieve with the recomposition. So it's quite technical and it gets quite complicated. And even within the wider recomposition goal, if we're looking at a point where we want to push our muscle gains up a little bit, we can have a slightly increased surplus on training days. And if we're looking at a point where we want to maximize fat loss, we can have a break-even calorie intake on your training days. Generally, I would recommend 3 big weight workout training days over the course of the week. I generally tend to do those on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday. So I'll have a small surplus, for example, 10% surplus in terms of calories in on my training days, and over the course of the rest of the week, I will have at least a 10% deficit. So over the course of a week, 7 days, we're on a slight deficit, but like I say, we've been able to gain muscle mass and lose body fat because of the way we've manipulated the calorie intake. The second core principle of successful recomposition training is progressive overload. This can't be stated heavily enough, so we want to keep the body in a constant state of overreaching. So we don't want to push so hard that we go into fatigue and overtraining, because that's terrible. It feels like having the flu. It's impossible to recover. You're going to get no benefit from doing that, and it can be a fine line. So this is why we really need to live in a way that facilitates the successful completion of the goals. But yeah, to go back to the progressive overload, what it really involves is a lot of workout tracking. So you need to keep your body in a state where it's constantly challenged enough so that it's slightly overreaching from what's possible. And you can do that by increasing the intensity of every workout. Now, this can either go by lifting a heavier weight. So for example, say we're deadlifting 100 kilograms. Next time we need to go up by a small increment. So maybe next time we're deadlifting 105 kilograms. You can also do this by increasing volume or reducing rest period. So any of those 3 things increases the intensity of the workout, and that's how you keep your body overreaching, and it's essential. So what is going to be important for you to do is to track each workout. You need to make sure that every time you go into the gym, you know exactly what you're doing, and you can determine whether you were able to make those incremental gains and improvements. Because if you don't know that, you can't keep track of your progress. And like I say, this is an audacious goal. Recomposition takes acute attention to detail, both in your training and your nutrition. So workout logging is very important. The third principle of recomposition training is intermittent fasting, and it's really the only one that I would consider an optional one. It's not for everyone. Some people are quite uncomfortable with intermittent fasting. It doesn't make them feel very good. I would suggest that you try to push through that, because it is uncomfortable and it is counterintuitive in the early days, but as you push on with it, for me, my strength went up. I found it much easier to stay lean. I found that I believe I recover better. And really, I think I've even aged less than in previous years, because I'm not having that high sugar morning hit of traditional breakfast foods. Through the lens of a recomposition goal, the active growth hormone, so we release most of our growth hormone at night as we go to bed, and as soon as we introduce sugars, we get an insulin spike, and growth hormone can't compete with the insulin, so we lose all the benefits of the growth hormone as soon as we have our breakfast, even if we have the milk in a coffee. So in the absence of that growth hormone stays active for longer, and growth hormone is very, very useful in both gaining muscle. It's not like testosterone, but it plays a part, and it's also very useful in losing body fat and helping with recovery. So through the recomposition lens, it's a very, very useful hormone for us to treat very well. And intermittent fasting is really an essential tool from that perspective. So I would recommend it very highly. The intermittent fasting protocol that I use generally is 16-8, so that's an 8-hour eating window. So you just eat for 8 hours a day, and you have 16 hours where you fast. So all you're doing is restricting the amount of hours that you eat. You have the same amount of calories in, but you just eat it in less time. Like I say, with a recomposition goal, we can adjust things on the fly, even within the wider recomposition goal. So if you're looking at increasing your fat loss, you can push your feasting windows shorter, and that will help you. It will help facilitate faster fat loss even within the recomposition goal. So intermittent fasting is very flexible, and again, it's not like a ketogenic diet, which is very useful, but not for our purposes here. So it's not like ketogenic diets where you're out. You come out of ketosis and you're out of the diet for a while. You have to go back in. Intermittent fasting is, if I want to have breakfast today, I'm staying over at a hotel, whatever I'm doing socially, I can just do it again the next day. So very flexible tool and very useful from the recomposition perspective. The fourth core principle of successful recomposition training is lifestyle. So this means really taking a 40,000-foot view of your lifestyle, making sure that your health is not compromised in any way. This means making sure that you're getting adequate sleep, you're not running into fatigue, you're not running into frequent and unnecessary injuries because we're not doing the mobility work and the myofascial release work and the stretching work, making sure that our diet is not a pro-inflammatory diet. Ideally, we want it to be an anti-inflammatory diet. If the foods we're taking in are causing us all sorts of digestion problems and systemic inflammation and raising our risk factors of certain diseases and ailments, we're gonna have a compromised system. And if we have a compromised system, we have free radicals in the system, oxidative stress, we're not maintaining protein synthesis, we're not activating the mTOR pathway, we don't have adequate AMPK enzyme. We're just asking too much of the body. We're asking for muscle mass and shedding body fat at the same time, whilst our health is compromised. It's just not feasible. So this is something I really don't think enough people take into account when they have an audacious bodybuilding goal or an aesthetic goal. You really have to look at lifestyle factors. Like I say, it's not just a case of having the training plan, putting in the hard work, eating the right amount of calories. The weight of different calories is different, the nutrient value is different, the effect on the body is different, and same with training. You can do the same workout, and I've seen it countless times in my own life and in the life of my clients. You can do the same workout but not get the same results if you're overly stressed and overly compromised. So this is a massive factor. If you want the best out of a recomposition phase, you have to think about your lifestyle comprehensively and holistically, and really do the best you can to improve wellness, and then your body's going to work with you rather than against. So in the manner in which we've laid out the recomposition training, it can work for nearly anyone. The ideal scenario is that you're somebody who wants the muscle mass and the lean gains, but you're willing to take a slower approach. So you're willing to take an 18 to 24, if not longer approach to getting the physique you want. That is the ideal circumstance. If you're willing to have that trade-off, that's the perfect scenario. Second is somebody who's coming off of a period of deconditioning or detraining. So if you're coming off of just maybe an injury, or maybe a period of training lighter, or maybe a period of not actually training for a little while, but you have trained in your past, this is something that can really massively accelerate the process of getting you back to where you need to be. Third is perhaps somebody who's starting their fitness journey from a position of being quite overweight in terms of body fat, and they don't want to just massively lose body fat and then not really have the kind of athletic physique to show at the end of it, and then, like we talked about right at the beginning of the video, have to do these big bulking and cutting phases. So somebody who kind of has the foresight to think, well, I'm going to take a slower journey, but as the body fat comes off and I do lose my weight, there is going to be an element of muscularity there that gets revealed, and you're going to have an aesthetically pleasing physique at the end of it. So those three circumstances, I would say, were the ideal for recomposition training. But like we said, it can work for just about anyone. The only people that I would recommend not do a recomposition training phase would be a trainer who's feels like they've reached near maximum potential. So they feel like they've kind of maxed out their genetic potential for muscularity. If you're looking to get that kind of last 5 to 10% of what you feel you're capable of naturally, I would recommend that more of the kind of Vince Gironda programs. So they would be like German volume training, or 8x8 with 30-second rests, or 15x4 programs. So you can Google those. They're really kind of shock and awe training programs. I've made some videos on several of them actually, and they are amazing programs for really gaining muscle fast, and the recomposition training just isn't right for that if you feel like you're at the kind of peak or the maximum potential of what you can achieve. Second would be hard gainers. So this is like the typical ectomorph who finds it very, very difficult to put on muscle mass. Recomposition isn't the right training protocol for you, because you typically won't have a hard time with keeping body fat off anyway. So really what you want to do is just spend the vast majority of your time on a much higher calorie surplus, and really hitting again the shock and awe, consistently hitting heavy weights workouts aimed at hypertrophy. The only other kind of category of people that I wouldn't suggest is take a recomposition training phase is somebody who's new to training entirely. So I previously said that if you were coming from a perspective of being quite overweight and new to training, it might be for you. But if that's not your scenario and you're also new to training, I wouldn't recommend recomposition, because again, I think if you're really new, you only get one shot at those kind of newbie gains, we call them, or beginner gains. When you're really new to training, you're new to resistance training, you get a free pass. You get a lot of muscle mass in the early weeks, and it will just never be that rapid again. So take advantage of that, in my opinion. Gain the muscle mass you can in your early stages of training. You don't need to be doing a recomposition trades. Really take advantage of the beginner gains, because like I say, it's a great time and it only comes once. So please take advantage of that, guys. It's important to keep in mind that recomposition training is a set of principles. It's an idea. It's not a training program as such. So there are many different routes to achieve the same goal. But let me outline one that's worked for me. It's worked on my own body and it's worked for many of my clients. So step one is we need to find our basal metabolic rate. Now this is the amount of calories we need to bring in to maintain our current weight. We can use a formula for that, and I'll flash that up. That is the Benedict-Harris equation. So use the formula that flashed up, and then we need to adjust that for activity. So this means that it's taken into account the calories that we're going to burn in our everyday lives and in the training that we're going to be doing as part of the recomposition program. So once we have that number, we can then decide on our deficits and our surplus. So what I would recommend is on our training days, and remember we spoke about 3 significant total body weight training days, I would recommend a surplus of, well, actually between a break-even intake and a surplus of 20%. So say for example your basal metabolic rate adjusted is 2,000 calories, you would have 2,400 calories on your training days. On your non-training days, and there we're speaking of days that you're not doing weight training, so you still may be doing cardio, which we'll touch on in a second, I would have a -10 to -20% deficit. And again, as we spoke about in recomposition training, you can adjust the deficit and the surplus to hit your specific goals within the wider recomposition goal. So if you want to focus more on muscle gain, then you just bring those surpluses up. And if you want to focus on fat loss, you take those deficits further apart and you bring the surpluses on your training days down. You may even take them down to a break-even level. Okay, so from there we need to look at our macronutrient split. So this is how we split our calorie intake between protein, carbohydrate and fat. Because they do different things in the body. They have different amounts of calories for one, but also the nutrients are used for different things. So what we want ideally is a 35% protein intake, 35% fat intake, and a 30% carbohydrate intake. So remember, to touch on the carbohydrates, that we're not going down the ketogenic route in this video. This is a recomposition program that's fueled entirely by glycogen, so we need good quality carbohydrates. We want higher or faster digesting, faster carbohydrates that are faster turned into sugar within the body, faster utilized pre and post workouts, and then slower when you're having your meals further away from your workouts or on non-training days. In addition to that, one distinction that not a lot of people make is with your protein, you want foods that are rich in leucine. So that's L-E-U-C-I-N-E, not lysine, because foods that are rich in leucine have been found to help activate or enhance the mTOR pathway and protein synthesis, which is really, really important for us, given that our goals are to gain muscle mass on quite a small calorie or on a calorie deficit. So we need every advantage we can get. In terms of the training itself, I recommend hypertrophy specific training. Now this is not a training program I've invented. It's a training program that utilizes what you would call the minimum effective dose of exercise, or the minimum stimulus, the minimum amount of muscle damage that is required to stimulate muscle growth. Now, this is really important because it allows you to train very frequently without the massive barrier to recovery, because you're only training, or there's only as much volume as it takes to stimulate the outcome you're looking for, and then you move on. So it's HST is really, really good. I'm going to flash up a modified HST program. So you spend a certain amount of weeks at a certain rep range. So for example, you might spend 3 weeks, 2 weeks, or 4 weeks at 15 reps. Then you would move on. You would skip a couple of weight classes in terms of, say for example, your bench press was on 60 kilograms. You might skip 62 and 65 and then move on to the next rep range, which would be 10. And you would do the same thing after a given amount of weeks, and you can adjust this amount of weeks. It's a modified training program, and you can do that again for 5 repetitions. So again, this works on 2 different workouts. It's a total body workout, very, very low volume, just 2 sets per exercise, and you're going to go on an A-B-A-B-A-B protocol. So that means week 1 is A-B-A, so workout A is going to be twice, and then workout on the second week you're going to go B-A-B, so you're going to have 2 of the B workout the following week, and that's the way it's going to go throughout the whole training phase. So again, this is why the principle of overreaching, the principle of progressive overload is really important, because we're not using massively complex workouts. We're not using 100 different exercises. We're using basic compound exercises over and over again, but we know we're making progress because we're gradually raising the intensity. And that's really where the magic of HST or the kind of bodybuilding training programs really shine, is the fact that you can track the progress so reliably. So what you want to do is, over the course of the recomposition phase, it doesn't have to be religious, it doesn't have to be dogmatic. If you feel like you're not gaining the muscle mass you want, you can change your calorie surpluses and deficits. And likewise, if you're not losing the amount of body fat you want, you have the freedom to change your calorie surpluses and your deficits throughout the training phase, and you can do that at any point. So yeah, guys, I hope I've explained recomposition. Like I say, it's something that I've used, I continue to use, and I've used it with many of my clients. It's fairly complex, and it takes a lot of pre-planning, a lot of dedication, but it really is that holy grail of losing body fat and gaining muscle at the same time. It's certainly possible for you, and I wish you the best of luck with it, guys. If you get a free moment, check out my podcast. It's the Healthy Ambition Podcast by Scott Laidler on all major podcast players. Thanks, guys. Good luck with the recomposition.